As part of that, I'd like to also see how the community, to review how the community has been participating in the in our quality assurance effort during the past cycle. In particular, we do have Jean-Baptiste from the QA team and Pedro as well, who've been making a call for testing in particular that really helped us gathering a very coherent feedback and set of test results at the end of the cycle. One point I'd also like to address, because it was part of the action items that kind of were done, but some of them were also postponed, which is related to other testing results. So we plan to have a lot of tests around Unity be run on different set of machines. So this is an effort that actually was not possible to undertake until quite late in the cycle. So I'd like to, again, as much as possible, if there are participants here who can help, see how we can continue this effort and expand the variety of systems we have access to and on which we can run Unity tests. Right, so I've put also a couple of elements to consider during the discussion, but right, first I'll give a short intro on the processes. So if you're in the DX team, or if you're working with us, or if you're contributing to the Unity project, you know that you can use Bazaar code reviews to check every code changes that go into the Unity project or its related modules. So as part of that, there's been a set of coding guidelines that have been elaborated, and on top of which we'd like to expand to provide even more guidance for developers and contributors to participate in the overall development effort. So as part of that, we've noticed that the overall management of the objects has been difficult at some point during the cycle. We are aware of the problem, and this is something we want to address during the next cycle by giving more examples and guidelines on how people need to use the objects throughout Unity. In particular, when objects are managed by different systems, like typically GObject and C++, and this is where we've seen some frictions. Another part is that error cases are known to be a difficult problem to solve. I don't think we'll be able to solve all of the problems related to that, but this is also a target that we have identified and where we think we can improve the way Unity deals with those cases. Typically, when is an error so bad that the system needs to stop or tell the user what's happening or something like that. So here as well, we'd like to start creating and building a set of development guidelines for contributors to know what's the recommended way of doing things. If you're providing for example, a patch for one of our libraries like Nux, don't use exit, right? It's bad.
And it was the case, so that's what.
Right, but yeah, that's a common joke. The thing is that if we ever have to exit, it's probably because the situation is so bad that we should have a way to tell the user or to exit more gracefully than stopping the program. Okay, so that's to give you a heads up about what we're planning to do next cycle. It's not simple, right? It will take some significant efforts to do that and put that in place. And if you have good ideas, of course, patches welcome, sort of. So I'm proposing to take a look at the different frameworks we have in place and identify where, the team thinks, and also with the help of the community and the participants here, where it would be useful to invest. That is, whether we should invest in a lot of tests. That is, add a lot of tests around campus, for example, or whether Unity itself requires some more effort here, or whether it's more of at the library level that you think we should also invest in priority. Right. This is.
Well, if we're going to be merging with
two debates.
It seems like the library is a good place to start, like our new shared code library, a good place to start building up really robust test frameworks.
So, sorry, repeat the question again.
The new shared libraries between 3D and 2D
2D
are a good place to start our effort to build up new robust like testing frameworks and stuff like that. Going back and doing the old code is like a noble goal, but starting with the new stuff, it's probably much easier to build it from the start rather than going back. So strong test frameworks, test applications to make sure we're running the whole thing down the stack.
Right. Right on time. We were talking about Unity.
Unity
2D as well. So,
so this sprint we talked about using Google Mop and the Google Unit test framework. What's the name?
So it's the Google test framework.
Yeah.
I thought it was more clever name, I guess.
And we'll use the glib test framework for the services, which will be G-Object, GVBus. And the Google test frameworks for the C++ wrappers to the services. Client side. Does it give, well, they don't give us tons of stuff, but it's a C++ API. So
right. And so, mock objects are created in this case. So, but the C version of that, I think we had researched that 2 cycles ago, no? Or
we'll use glib testing.
Right. Yeah. So we keep using it, but however, there is no like silver bullet to automatically get G-object, mock object, or.
No, but these are all service-based anyway. So
right. Which are all covered by some kind of test framework.
But apart from that, we also
there's nicer ways to test.
said that we tend to look more for writing code that's more testable. Instead of looking at the tests and then, looking at that, so we kind of need to code for testing, so to make actually test-driven development a lot easier, because sometimes it's just not. And when you juggle around the code a little bit, then it becomes a little bit easier.
Yeah, so for the new stuff, Jason and I had talked about doing sort of test-driven development where I would do the test at the same time to be writing the code.
Right. Yeah. So knowing that I think there is a fertile ground with that, which is already covered by the good unit.
Yeah, so it has a really good unit test library, at least covering the daemon side of things and some of the library side of things too. And the library side wasn't considered as critical because it literally just wraps the daemon. So it would be just testing dbus. But the development effort there was largely, we wrote it first and then we kind of put the tests in a little later on, which became really helpful when we started adding more features. So I don't know, I think it was useful to get to like a 1.0 first, and then it really helped with regression testing, right?
Yeah. Doing more of this approach. Okay. So the change you made to typically use the state machine. So do you think this is like where you could start, or it's more like with the changes and the adjustment that design would like to do for that cycle?
So which state?
Where would you start? Like, we're trying to use TDD, but we know it's difficult, and we know it's not like magic. So if we were to start doing that.
So there's a lot of good parts of Unity now that are ready to have unit testing tooled into them and really need it. So some really obvious starter points are, like you mentioned, the launcher hide machine and the launcher hover machine. Because those are just state machines. They should be completely testable and in fact mathematically provable. But
So instead of writing tests, let's just write proof.
right.
But you need to do proof that your proof is right, or it's not.
The stuff with the indicate that we front the indicator service, that should be mostly a copy and paste with just some properties being changed into the reflection properties now.
Right.
But apart from that, they're all already abstracted out to the point that you can test them. They're all they're all abstract classes with implementations, so you can test them all fine. Same thing for most of the Dash. Well, actually, all of the Dash. There's all like that as well. All the models and everything.
So it'd be really good to write mock classes.
Really, because it's all abstracted out and then with implementations.
Okay.
The launcher will be the next thing to have the same thing, but just we have to remember that we want to write a launcher service. So a lot of the core will be tested in the launcher service and not on the wrapper for the launcher service. So, and that will be obviously.
So you're seeing the launcher. Well, anyway, yeah, if we have parallel threads running, it's not necessarily a point of saying dash first and launcher then, right?
Right.
Can happen.
Right. The two which are connected are panel and dash because I do both of them.
Yeah.
But it will be panel first because Florian and I agreed that will be the easiest for us to test out the new sharing code. And it will be because the service already exists and then we just need to do a bit of clean up there.
Okay.
So that will be the first one to do it, and then we can start talking about both the glib and the gtester tests. Like, I don't expect, so one thing, I'm not expecting you to write those tests, but we should talk about how we want to set them up.
Oh, I thought I was supposed to write those tests.
It shouldn't, well, it might be certain very, very complex things where you're testing like between two processes or something like that, where it may be good for you to spend a week on that, because it's going to take a week to do. But the actual unit testing of those things shouldn't be what you do, that should be what we do.
Okay. If we're on the panel and the indicators, so yeah, there's a test framework covering this the panel service, and through which some of the indicator stack is also tested, and there is also a set of tests and frameworks in the indicator stack itself.
Right.
Is there something in between that we're missing, or are we considering that the integration?
So let's assume that the indicator ABI is stable, right? And we know that it might get bumped.
We have said here, so we do assume that the indicator ABI is stable.
We're going to assume that lib indicator is stable for a cycle. If lib indicator is stable, what we could do is we can very easily write a lib indicator. So that uses lib indicator and exposes the state. Then we can test that the panel service is reading that and reflecting that state correctly through all the various things you can do, like hide, set visible, sensitivity, sizing, everything. We don't support sizing, but that's something we should check. So we can check all that.
Isn't that stuff already in introspection done?
We don't have introspection done on the service, only on the. I mean, you can, but then you have to fire up Unity, whereas you can actually you're just testing a debug service, so it's very easy to query. What I mean to say, there's like 13 things which we take account of, and then we build the list and we dump them. So between the entries, everything, we can basically have one thing that fulfills the indicator, lib indicator API, and exposes it, so we can test that entire section separately.
Okay.
And then we can do something else for actually representing it.
Okay.
David?
Yeah.
Have you talked at all about stress tests?
No. So maybe this is something, so either we can talk about that when we talk about hardware testing, but actually, yeah, stress testing, yeah, I haven't put that on the list. Stress for performance or stress for real stress, like it's going to break if you put too many windows or if you things like that.
Yeah, because it seems like we're getting a number of bugs which presumably are X driver issues, but reproducing them is kind of tough.
So we had time to do the application from hell this cycle, it kind of got deferred last cycle. The application from hell.
Right, yeah, just the famous one.
Yeah, we should.
So something like that would be handy for helping reproduce something.
Like the issues maybe could have been tracked this way or identified this way. Yeah, it's true. Yet the IDE, well,
yeah, we should have
tons of things on our plate, so.
Okay, so we also need to recognize this is a short cycle as well. Yeah, we should try and kick that off. But just write it in a way where it's easy to add new things. So start off something simple.
You know, we had done a really simple thing where it was just a bash script that just switched workspaces back and forth and popped up windows. Something to that level would get start.
Right, I'm just thinking
Python
Python script and just does really crappy stuff with glands.
Yeah,
and
like
a lot of them at once. You know?
Opening a project just to gather a series of test scripts like that, like your bash script from now, some Python application, something similar. I'm sure it's Sam. Yeah, you have.
Yeah. So, in my opinion, the best way to do this is.
Period.
Yeah. So, in my opinion, the best way that you can actually do this is you write a C application, which just tests running different X calls in different orders, because often the kind of bugs that you find is usually where like the window manager will get into some messed up state because some application is doing something weird. So what you want to do there is you want to have a look at like which orders of like which X calls on which windows are going to be causing problems for us. And in those cases, you need to be able to like implement something in the window manager to actually implement the policy quite well. You know, for example, like things like the invisible window issue that some people were having, like that was actually really easy to test once we figured out what was going on. So we just had like a test case which you just like ran and it worked. And if you have something like that just like tests the variations of X calls and like test to make sure that like every single like legacy behavior that an application could have, because there are quite a few of them, every single legacy behavior that an application could have actually works, because often what you find is when you're developing a window manager, you're just developing based on the applications that you have in your own system and not based on, you know, crap application that you might have somewhere else. You know, we get a lot of problem with like Java applications, for example, because they just do weird things. And unless you actually have those applications installed on your system, it's very difficult to reproduce the bugs.
Yeah, so I didn't get the start because I was taking notes.
Okay, yeah, so...
But can someone contribute notes to that?
So the point of that would be you just have like a C-based program which just like does, which just says like, okay, I want to repair a window, then move it, then configure it, then do this. And then just does all these three things in order. If it doesn't work, rah! If it does, great.
Okay. So we're talking about a window manager oriented stress test, right?
Exactly.
And how, you know, I think I looked into that and tried to find something that other window managers were using, but I didn't find much.
It doesn't exist.
Right, so precisely. And if it doesn't exist, it's probably because it's hard and not necessarily.
Well, it's just a lot of work.
Right. So, and considering that it's a short cycle, as you were reminding us.
That's my mantra.
Earlier, yeah. What's reasonable to do this cycle becomes the question.
Well, something that's written in Python sounds to be, because of time constraints, more reasonable to tackle this time around than doing something C-based, especially with random Ocelot calls, which do funny things.
Yeah, but I mean, you're just doing that in Python anyway. It's like just the
So
same
it doesn't
thing.
have to be C-based?
No, not necessarily. Although it'd be nice if it was C-based.
It doesn't have to. Just make it. Then you
It's
can
not
just
like one significantly faster than the other.
exactly.
Whereas you guys were, so the bash program you have also exercises the window manager, or it's something different, I mean, for the X server, or what I'm trying to see is how many, you know, of the small programs around we can gather that could actually be helpful for testing the window manager, and
well, I guess
on top, or
the point to make.
I could dig it up and send it to you.
yeah.
Yeah.
The point to make is that you don't want fuzz testing, and you don't want, you essentially don't want something that just like fuzzes the window manager by just sending it all this random garbage. What you want is something that tests particular cases, particular things that applications may do.
But if you can reproducibly send, you know, like garbage to the window manager, at least you know it passes the test, and
right. But that's
consistently. So then it's a question of refining actually the kind of kind of stuff you're throwing at the window manager, and in some case you can refine the test case that represent or that can trigger some of your favorite problems, like the S problem and which one, the I problem, the invisible window problem.
Right. All right. We
for
find
which you
you
have cases. I mean, you have automated test cases.
Yeah. Like it's doable. You just want to have a look at like things that applications may do and implement this into the test case.
So is that
do you have a list of like broken applications, or you know offhand a bunch of broken applications?
Yeah.
Can you compile a list of the ones that you know offhand?
Yeah.
So is that reasonable to say that in the case of the window manager, again concerning the short cycle, putting together a series of tests first and then thinking about how we can reproduce the 2 or 3 major culprits from the last cycle is a good objective, right? And then if we have time, or if we find more tools, or if we had more contributions, we can consider adding them to a test suite. Yeah.
Does testing for accessibility come in here in place?
Sorry.
Accessibility testing.
Right.
For those if you have to use an onboard keyboard, for example, or Orca screen reader, does that come into this any place? Are we testing for that at all?
Not in the manager, no.
Just John Baptiste, the QA. Can you
Yeah.
listen to any of that?
We are using accessibility layer to run desktop testing, so
So
directly we are testing the accessibility tools.
So yeah, it's being tested somewhat.
But
And, we go through the whole cycle and we say, everything's working great, and when it comes right down to testing this stuff at the final ISO images, it don't work for us.
Yeah, but I think in the case of accessibility testing, the first step would be to write down a test plan. Like, just a list of manual tests, because we've tested the way, Unity is working with the indicators, with the launcher, the panel, the launcher, and the dash, and so on. Luke has been doing, a great job of verifying that regularly during the development cycle, but I'm not sure there is like, a defined way of ensuring everything is tested exactly the same time, every time. And to me, this is the first step. Right? Because before we can even talk about automating something, we need to say, okay, here it is, as the baseline, and besides, here are the main sources of problems. Like in the case of Compass, I think, and not to blame you against nothing personal, but in the case of Compass, we've clearly identified the top 3 kind of problems we had to find, and so we want to make sure that throughout the cycle we don't have regressions here. Same for accessibility, I would say. Like, once we have the baseline, then we can identify the 2 or 3 cases where we know we have had regression, so we know there is some fragility in the way all of the stack is integrated, and make sure it doesn't move while we're developing on it. I know what you think about that, but to me it seems like the reasonable approach, as opposed to inventing like a powerhouse to test something that doesn't actually matter for users, right?
I think we should really engage people having accessibility needs to test early our version, to have some feedbacks and stuff like that, because it's really something we missed, because we don't really, we don't really know, and we have a lot of things to do, and we need some, as we have some user testing for some configuration, we also need user testing for accessibility. And people having those needs are the best people to try that. So I think we should really engage this community so that we can have something reliable and get feedback really early on.
So was there something we could fix between Unity team or DX team and accessibility team that was missing last cycle to just get the feedback? Like, you guys have broken everything.
Yeah, I think there is a session. It has been moved on, but I think there
is a session.
I will be there anyway. So
there are 2 things we need to discuss in this session. Maybe just to give a heads up, it's how to finish the job, because we promised it was going to be there, at least the launcher and the panel, and well, the dash, we had high hopes of landing that. The end result is that the panel and the launcher are kind of working, but there are still bugs. And the dash, well, is not there, right? The framework is there, but it's not all connected, and the result is that Unity is not the default environment for people who need an accessible environment. So that's something we need to honor.
So when is the session? It's tomorrow.
Right. So maybe I can give this information at the end of the session. Just checking how we're doing with the time. Stress testing. So I think that was a good, a very good suggestion.
Right. Is that kind of?
I think that's addressed. Yeah. Can we consider that we've addressed the topic, or for stress testing, or are there more things we'd like to add on under this umbrella?
Like how far down, like, do you want us, are you looking for us to do GL stress testing more, or like Sam says, like there will be no manager things and X things we can do that we know great?
Yeah, whatever, I guess where we see the bugs, you know, anything that we can do to expose those bugs will help. Because then what I'd like to be able to do is take a simple test script or test package, and when I forward the driver bugs upstream, be able to give those developers the tests so that they can run it if they can and stuff. So they can reproduce the issue and solve. Because it seems like we have a number of corruption bugs that are kind of blocked right now because upstream isn't able to reproduce them.
Corruption, like rendering corruption,
right?
Yeah. So and here it's really a question of extracting a test case from Unity so that we can pinpoint where the issue is in their drivers, right? So, which is ideally providing them with Unity and a way to reproduce the issue. More ideally, that's what we can give them for the moment. But I understand that it's not the way they're working. They'd like to have a very simple program with just the GL instructions to.
Well, even
we use API trace for that and grab a lot.
The problem is the API trace doesn't work with composers. It actually needs the GLX XTFP extension implemented.
Yeah, if we can give them a test case, that's great. But even in situations where we can't do that, if we can at least give them some way to run for a couple hours and get it, then they can examine it from a different angle.
Yeah. This reminded me of another discussion that I actually wanted to have with regard to testing. A lot of the times we find that users will be filing bugs which are very difficult to reproduce unless you have like a very specific machine type, or it's very timing dependent or things like that. One of the things which I had an idea to do this cycle, if we get the time to, is in a port, when you actually go and file your bug, it'll say like, okay, roughly what kind of bug is this? Is it like your window manager's playing up, you're having like graphical corruption, or like something showing up that shouldn't, or whatever, right? And then what we'll do is we'll get a port to pull down all the packages which are required to make like traces of what's going on in X11 or what's going on GL-wise, if we can actually get API trace working with compers, which is going to be a bit difficult. Pull down those packages and say like, okay, is this bug reproducible? Yes, no. If yes, like go ahead and reproduce it. I'm like now watching everything that's going on in your system. And then like, okay, I stop reproducing it, send it off to developers. And then like things like API trace and Xelvis, what they do is they allow you to like play back those events in the exact order, and it's very, very useful for tracking these bugs.
We shouldn't need the debug packages for that.
No, you don't need debug packages. You just need to install things like API trace and Xelvis and set them up, because they're just really hard to set up. And if we can do it in like an automated fashion, that just makes our lives so much easier.
So you're saying, why wouldn't we, I mean, does API trace slow things down? Can we run it all the time?
No, because it's slow.
Slow.
Like it's just like the Valgrind problem that we have, for example. It's like, if we think there's a memory leak in Unity or whatever, it's like, oh, and we can't reproduce that. Then we have to go and tell the user to go and install all the debug packages so they can get Valgrind running and things like that. Whereas, for example, if we could just do that for them.
It was like a meta package or something that said install to be debugging.
Yeah, like if we could just say, okay, in a port, like what's the problem like? Memory leak? Okay. Pull in Valgrind, pull in all the debug packages. Great, reproduce the problem. Once you're done, hit stop, send it off to developers.
Well, I think we shouldn't expect users to install Valgrind and to...
Exactly.
Because they won't be able to do it.
Yeah, so we just need to automate that in a port, just like hit next and it installs all the
stuff on users is what we are trying to avoid with Apport from the beginning.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm trying to see, you know, how much we need to automate versus clearly document for the users who are willing to, you know, contribute that level of testing. Because when, you know, if they are starting to find bugs,
but during the cycle,
I think they're willing to.
Shouldn't we expect that all users are willing to test during the cycle? During the development cycle, isn't that kind of
I'm sure running alphas, they're probably willing to do stuff.
I mean, all of the feedback we've had demonstrate that people are willing to, you know, give us more information if we can just explain them, you know,
how those tools
to do
work.
that. So I think it's a good suggestion. But so, how much of that needs to be automated for users to really participate?
Ideally, you'd have like a checkbox that says, "Is it reproducible?" and then you just hit next and then stop.
But so that means more concentration as opposed to...
Yes. So aren't you going to need to restart though?
Yes, you would have to restart comes in.
So could we do that? We discussed last UDS and we never did was using a guest session for that. Is that still reasonable?
Yeah. Well,
So
it depends because it might be like specific to the user session or like some kind of thing that they've done
in their environment.
And you know, if they can't reproduce the bug, then it's not of any use to us. Like what you want to do is you want to get the user into a situation where they can reproduce the bug.
Yeah, but I mean, it seems for some bugs that would be helpful. No? Or yes?
It would be helpful to see if it's happening on the default session.
We now have the ability to do custom guest sessions, so we can make a custom guest session and set things up differently.
Oh, really?
Or the environment variable that said where to put the bug data.
But
stuff like that.
So the interest of the guest session is that you don't have to restart Unity, Campus with all of that enabled. You do it in the guest session, right?
But also it's a cleaner trace, hopefully.
Yeah. I kind of feel like people, when they can reproduce a problem, it's more in their environment, or that is, certain problems are on. You know, you need your email client, for example. You need different things that you don't necessarily have in a guest session, or
you would have them, you just wouldn't have them set up. Like it's every time I launch Thunderbird, right?
I mean, I understand the interest of not having applications be polluted by specific settings and.
What is that we are already reporting these settings.
Right.
So
if we consider
every time.
If we consider what we have now, which is, well, we have a port integration for Unity and Campus, reporting a lot of already very useful and
we are reporting a lot of data.
Right.
I think that we don't use them as much as we should.
Right, but still, adding the API trace and what Sam is suggesting could help, again, improve the resolution of some very tricky bugs.
Should be some kind of test suite, like, is this working, is this working, is this working? You know, so not going to Valgrind war, but only, you know, something that we know that it can hit some kind of corner cases and triggers.
Well, yeah, but the problem is that sometimes these bugs are so complicated that you just need to know everything that's going on, just from start to finish.
That's why you are the cordon?
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is that if you can't reproduce the problem, then you don't know what's going on.
But you have the cordon, so we can know the state.
Yeah, but that's only the final state of the program. That's not everything that's gone on inside the X server.
Can I propose another way of looking at the problem? So for the moment, we don't have this extra level of automation. We could add this extra level of automation, and that would apply to Campus, or would that also apply to the rest of Unity? Because if that applies, you know, to a wider, set of elements that we're developing, it makes sense to invest, you know, with that extra level of automation. Whereas if it's Campus specific, I think the first step would be to actually document what you're saying and make sure the documentation is as easy and as, you know, fun for the user as possible, so that they really, you know,
it's never fun.
Yeah, there's something for design, make back reporting fun.
It's, you know,
Cartoon character.
finding bugs, there is a certain level of, you know, it's interesting actually to know why it fails, right? So, what you say?
It's a strange way of
So,
satisfaction.
yeah, maybe
And
we're taking a lot of time on that, and so yeah, to talk about discussion. So, yeah, I think that would be the first step. That is documenting how these extra tools can be used by users, and simply. Second thing is, would that apply to the rest of Unity?
Yeah, evaluate the
Very
scope and
interesting.
see how much. Evaluate the scope and see how wide we can apply it.
Right. Okay. Excel in this. Cool. Excel this, in fact. So that's for a port. If we get back to the items on the agenda. So I think we've covered, well, the general guidelines. We've covered the frameworks we can reasonably put in place for Compass. Unity itself, we haven't really discussed Unity actually, because we've discussed the panel indicators, the launcher, BAMF. Can we talk a bit about, so Unity, Knox, Touch, those are the three that were still on the list.
So for the panel in Unity and the dash in Unity, they're both designed to use the abstract interfaces for the models. So you can easily plug things in and then query them to figure out whether it's doing, the connections being made correctly and continues to be made correctly. They both are runnable by themselves. They're not connected to Compass, so they can be tested like that if you want to try either through accessibility or through whatever, just mouse movement testing, so they're doable.
Yeah.
What's the other thing about that? You can. So the whole point of this is that the actual real unit testing is done elsewhere, like where all the real data is. What the main thing that we lack and we don't have a great plan for is to make sure the visuals are correct. And the whole pixel perfect sounds, in my opinion, is completely useless.
That's something that's kind of in line with the whole Hanover process. Once we have that in place and we have actual values, that we can then hook into the image comparison stuff. So we'll have to figure out a way in this cycle maybe to see the threshold where we have this margin of error that we allow, where we can say, okay, designers are happy with that look, although we still have like 7% of pixels which are not completely correct. So
have you thought about a histogram to do that? You do histogram comparison, you get like, you can have two photographs of the book cover and it's almost the same. And you can actually get like a deviation from the two images, so you can see how much one deviates from the other in percentage. It's a really easy way of doing it.
But what about the diff, perceptual diff? So we're saying
it uses the same type of No, we're not saying that.
Okay, I don't know.
It uses the same type of thing. What I'm saying is the whole point of using it comes out as rubbish because the design changes. And what I don't want to do is spend tons of time updating all screenshots and whatever. Unity is massive. It will take ages to do that. What I actually mean is there's a certain level where we just have to, we don't have all the hardware configurations, we don't know. We have to let it go out and we have to see what comes back.
Evan was showing me Sakuli, which seems like a really simple way of doing the visual testing.
Marco,
screenshots, drop it in and those reusable.
Maybe this is the key.
So we looked at that, I think a year or so back, so maybe we have to look at it again to see whatever. But then there's the other thing about, we're writing widgets, right? And we need to make sure that the widgets, it would be nice to have some testing to make sure the widgets still work after, like either fundamental changes above and through. You know, scrolling still works. You know, key nav is reliable and whatever. So things like that. But so part of me wants all of those things, and the other part of me thinks we change so much every cycle. We're not in a we're not in a great place to have that depth of testing, because comparing to the time we have, we would be doing stuff which we'd remove because things would change, the UI would change, then you have to redo all the testing.
But then to me it looks like the approach would be to just put some, to lock down some subset of the interface, like typically the, the quick lists. The rendering is done. I mean,
yeah,
it shouldn't move anymore.
The branch that is still there.
You say that now.
Yeah, but we
right,
want to change
this
the
is
flow
finished.
of it.
No, but right.
That's what I mean. So it's never done. So what I mean to say is, I think, look, there's only a certain amount of resources we have. I think all our time should be going to make sure all the models and the glue between the models and the interface are as well tested as possible this cycle. And the next cycle, when we're in an LTS, we can make sure that all the UI is as good as possible. And for now, I'm just weighing up all the bugs we used to have compared to the state versus UI. It used to be more about the state being wrong than the UI being wrong. And it's very easy to see UI bugs.
So with UI, we just have the 1 pixel stuff. And there was still one with the system copies. But apart from that, we didn't really.
I think we need to give up on something, and I think this is something where it's very easy for us to tell when something's wrong and fix it.
And
we have tons of people who
the image comparison is more or less done. It's just not in trunk, and hooking that up doesn't need that much. And then the main work there is just taking screenshots at runtime and having the reference images from design, which are signed off to compare that. And that's the big chunk of the work. So that can come later. It's not like we need to prepare some large infrastructural work there. So.
No, I don't doubt the infrastructure. I doubt the signed-off design.
Yeah, John is very resistant to giving those. He basically wants Unity to give the spec and the reference.
Right, which makes it hard. It makes it a bit difficult. Because ideally, if you had, there's a level where we want to send it out to different known difficult platforms, David's computer, and figuring out how much we're deviating or how bad something's gone, but we're not there. We need to do the models and the grid first.
So I'll be the frog of the ecosystem.
Like you said, that might be a
When you're done with that, that's going into a lab somewhere.
Okay. So I volunteer.
The glass cube. Exhibit A.
Good. So let's close this box. I think that's a good thing to have that also in the discussion. But fine. The dash, the places and so on in particular. So
Live Unity will need testing.
That's
it's
that's
as we move forward, it just will get more complicated, and we don't have good testing there. So that's all me.
So is that something that should be approached with the 2D, 3D merge? Or it's something?
This is our
Unity in this case, yes.
This is our APIs for the world. It's not anything to do
for the places and
that will happen in the shared library.
Right.
They're basically ready. It's just whatever changes we make, we just need to. The main thing is we pull them all out of Unity and then upgrade them so it's easier to bind and things like that. We need to think a bit more about how we present them. But we'll be there. I'm not expecting too much.
To come back for a moment to the image comparison stuff, since we will be extracting the rendering from Modify OSD and put that on the Max Unity side. Just for me to be sure that that stuff is correct, I will be using image comparison anyway, so that I know that I'm not diverting too much. So we can use that as a test case.
As your life insurance.
Yeah. So it will happen in some way. So it's not like we're completely not doing anything.
No, it just means we'd be clever.
I mean that's.
But because in this case it's very.
It's very small and it hasn't changed in such a long time. So I think we're safe. And I mean I need to do that for my own sake.
Good point. Visual.
Although.
Okay, nice. Testing. What else? So we've covered mostly, all of the modules I wanted to cover. We still have like 10 minutes.
15?
Yeah, 10.
No, not 11.
Right. Nox, touch.
Sorry.
I arrived later. So, did you talk about to involve the community with some specific tests with the cycle using the ISO tracker?
Yeah, I'd like
because we had the desktop tracker that has been used for this power, but I think we can use more, especially between the milestone, because the community testing team works mainly on ISO testing. So between the milestone we have basically nothing to do. So if we can think about some test case and call the test inside the
again, that's been, we appreciated the feedback we've got. It's a call for testing has been issued. So I have that on the agenda, but I'm looking at the time and I'm wondering, so is there another session, I know, Pedro or Jean-Baptiste, where we could host the rest of that discussion of unity testing, or I can reschedule a session anyway. So that we can address particularly that, because I hate to miss it.
I think there is a session on getting more community contribution in Unity.
Right.
So maybe we can.
Okay, so if that works for you, then we'll continue discussing that during this other session, and so we can quickly finish. Yeah.
Let me have a look. So
yeah, if you can tell us.
Yeah. The accessibility session is tomorrow at in the same room.
Yeah.
And I will look for the other one.
So yeah. On the list, what's remaining is Knox touch and hardware testing results then, which is also a very a big topic. I don't think we'll have time for all of it.
Realistically, for us, we don't have the time to really make a test because it's going to go through a lot of changes.
Yeah.
And to try and keep any form of testing throughout that is Unity is a test case. We're not trying that. And it's really bad to say, but we have to be realistic.
No, I agree. Unity is the test case.
Do you want to do anything on which counts? Do you want to do anything on which counts?
Yeah, I think we're running out of time now.
We could always break early and go to lunch. Just saying.
That option is
no, we just need 5 minutes.
So the session in contribution for Unity and community involvement is tomorrow as well.
Okay, excellent.
And we have one after the other. So
okay.
So I think it's what time?
Yeah. Just before we finish this session, hardware testing and where we should also continue to invest. I'd like to get the feedback in particular from Rise. My big thing is that Autopilot was a very good program last cycle.
I basically finished.
Right, and I think we should do more of that.
Yeah, it's that, and also to run some of the Unity tests themselves, like having some hardware would be nice.
Yeah.
Even if it's not Unity itself, but even if it's Nux examples, and we can try and run them and make sure get some screen grabs and stuff.
Yeah.
So I think for us in the team, we need to get our Hudson sort of story sorted out. Like IS are running a really brand new version of Hudson, and it does way more things to us than we are. And it's on the cloud, we should get in.
Yeah.
And I think we need to switch to Launchpad recipes as well instead of doing our own magic.
Yeah.
And I was talking to someone who's going to help us do that.
But then, okay,
and all
so
that stuff will help the testing.
We have so many machines in Montreal, right?
Right.
We do, but so maybe we can have another session on our infrastructure, which should be interesting. But the other thing was that the certification team has been providing like representative machines,
right.
And at the end of the cycle was able to deliver like weekly test results. So they have not necessarily been visible or really used. But I think that's also a good source of information. What do you think about that? Right? Did it help you? The hardware sub team providing test results and saying this based on this machine and so on. So should we do more of that, more of Autopilot to exercise the things, or something different because it didn't work? Or
Yeah, I mean, the key thing is how we're going to use the results. And can we, like, for example, if an issue does come up, will we be able to say, hey, please test this fix or patch or something, to be able to get feedback on that. If we have that, yeah, that would be great.
So what I'm hearing is still +1 to do more of the supply mixing and hardware source tests useful. So it's mostly a question of making sure everyone sees that as a priority.
It's time. The session. No, 5 minutes left.
No, I think we're good. I think it's time. This room is hot. So David, get out of here.
Just to reiterate, I would say, I don't think we have a problem that we don't have enough bug reports. So I don't think we need to make more bug reports.
Yeah.
But we do need to have good ways of testing fixes for the bug.
Yeah.
So if we do that, that's great.